Hello, and welcome to the second video on the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT in this UCAT My EdSpace series. This video we are focusing specifically on true, false or can't tell questions and how to tackle them in the exam. A little about me, my name's Eleanor, I'm one of the teachers at My EdSpace, specifically an English teacher, and I will be guiding you through the verbal reasoning section because a lot of the information is relying on skills that are honed as an English student or honed in English and requires a lot of your critical thinking as well. So we will be going through this section together. Now, in the last video, we talked about how there are two types of questions, free text questions and true, false and can't tell questions on the verbal reasoning section. These are what they look like here in the blue box, and all true, false, can't tell questions follow the same format. They're all based on the contents of a 250 word to 400 word passage or the conclusions or inferences that can be drawn from it without inside information. The passages are on the left hand of the screen, questions on the right. There are 11 question sets, 44 questions and 22 minutes for all questions. So that's 28.6 seconds per question, which is very much not a lot of time to do it so much skim reading and question answering. So it requires quite a lot of efficient and tactical thinking as you're approaching it. There are usually 2 to 4 question sets, so 8 to 16 true, false, can't tell questions in the verbal reasoning section. This depends on the year, determined by the examiners so that the test structure does not become too predictable year to year. True, false, can't tell questions are asking you to evaluate the logic and veracity of statements based on the information that you have and what you can logically conclude just from the passage. So the exam is not expecting you to know anything or bring any particular reading content or subject material to the verbal reasoning section. It doesn't expect you to have read certain books or know about certain topics. It's expecting you just to prove what you can conclude from the information given. So don't worry if it's about a topic that you know nothing about. Sometimes it may be about a topic you know lots about. Both you want to keep in mind that you are meant to answer those only from the information you're given. So you can't bring any outside information from the outside world into the exam. You're also meant to divine the key information and avoid distractors. There is key information, clue words and keywords put specifically into the passage to help guide you and into the questions to help guide you. Similarly, there's also distractors put into both so that you are guided towards the incorrect information if you're not thinking critically, or information used to throw you off course if you are not careful and intentional in skimming through the whole passage and ensuring that the question you are answering and the answer you're giving is right. The order of the answers always stays the same. A is true, B is false, and C is can't tell, so you don't have to waste time reading them over and over again. All you need to do is read the question and then use it to help you skim the passage. Now, each option we talked about in the first video has real-world applications, true, false, and can't tell, but here in this context of the verbal reasoning exam, they have a very specific meaning. So we'll go through that and analyze one of the mnemonics that's pretty popular, moo, to see how it works for you and in some cases how it can become a pitfall for you as well. So, true. Based on the information in the passage, you can logically conclude that the statement is true. This is not just not false or could be true, but that the statement indeed is true. Okay? The moo mnemonic indicates that true is meant to be match. So does the information in the passage match the information in the question? Now, this can be slightly tricky because it doesn't allow for the fact that the wording in the passage and the wording in the question may intentionally be different. That may be a distractor for you in which you're meant to work out that the words or the synonyms are synonyms and that they are still pointing you towards the same answer of this is true. Okay, so it's if you spend time just looking for one word, and then if you can't find that word, then it's definitely not true, or definitely you can't tell, then you want to be mindful of the fact that that could be a distractor for you. Same for false. So based on the information in the passage, you can logically conclude that this statement is false. So definitively false, that usually for false shows that or indicates that there is information in the passage that contradicts, that goes against, or offers a completely different answer than what is given to you in the statement of the question. Now, sometimes that is a little bit tricky in that the wording again might be not on par, so it won't be the same exact words with a yes or a no, but rather that there are synonyms or antonyms used. The mu mnemonic uses opposite for this. That's also not entirely true, because not every false is just a pure opposite to the information in the passage, so that it is a key benefit or that it isn't a key benefit, but rather that the information, particularly with, for example, the numbers, is wrong, or the details or data in the passage is shown to be in contradiction to what the statement is saying. That leaves us our third option, can't tell. The mu for this actually works slightly better. Outside, something that's outside of those two very specific, very clear possibilities. So based on the information in the passage, you cannot logically and without a doubt make or disprove this statement. So this I often find the trickiest one, because you kind of have to do both to ensure that it's can't tell. You have to prove that it's definitely not true and it's definitely not false based on the information you have. Sometimes there are some pitfalls that we will get into with can't tell that make it seem like it's a can't tell, but again, usually depends on the wording of both the passage and the statement being slightly different but guiding you towards the same answer. Here are some common pitfalls for the true, false, can't tell, and we're going to take them one by one. So, the clue words. These are words that act as signposts for the answers. So, definitive words shut down multiple possibilities. Words like only, never, always, solely, impossible, must, that guide you towards this being the only option, and if there is evidence in the passage that that is not always or never the case, then that would be guiding you towards this answer being incorrect. Same for mitigating words. Mitigating words open up multiple possibilities. So they may say something like a certain type of car is painted in a variety of colours, and then the statement is that the cars could be made in a blue colour. Now, because of the information in the passage and the information in the statement, that opens up quite a lot of possibilities, right? The statement within the passage is broader, so if it says it could be blue in the statement that you're trying to evaluate, then you are guided towards that being accurate, that it is a possibility, versus if it was a definitive word, that they are always blue, but in the passage it says they are made in a variety of colours, that would guide you towards it being definitively false. Another pitfall is the dispersion of keywords. So as I said in the previous video, there may be keywords that you choose in your answers as you're going through the questions, and you are using them to look at the passage and to skim through it with a lens, looking for specifically those keywords. That is a really good strategy because, as we said in the previous video, you don't have time to read every passage. You only have time to skim using the keywords. That being said, Keywords sometimes are used more than once across the passage. This is done on purpose to ensure that you, as the test taker, are skimming through the entire passage and not stopping at your first instance of finding a keyword, because there may be information later in the passage or earlier in the passage that contradicts that specific sentence. That's the same case with mitigation and contradiction. So one part of the passage appears to support or guide you towards one of them, but if you've only read that portion, you may not see the fact that you're being guided towards the wrong answer on purpose, because later in the passage it flips it around. For example, one of those bridging words like however or alternatively. You will want to keep an eye out for bridging phrases. So often the examiners who write these passages put sentences next to each other or one after another that appear to be related, but don't use any words to specifically link them. So this is a trick because your brain, as you're reading through this, may link those two ideas together because they pertain to a similar idea. However, just because those ideas are related or correlated does not mean that one caused the other or one is a consequence of the other. That will be indicated to you through bridging phrases like as a result of or consequently in the passage. Those bridging phrases are often used to mark for you what the correct answer is or what the correct answer is not. You'll want to be mindful of outside information. It is not required, as I said. So if you know a lot about the topic, that might be to your disadvantage because you may use your previous knowledge to influence your choice on the exam. But your examiners, knowing that and choosing the topic specifically, you need to be mindful that you're not using your experience to answer these questions, but rather only the data in front of you. In the previous video, we also covered synonyms. So similar words like begin and commenced or unique and innovator being used. Just because you're looking for one word, you need to be mindful of the fact that a similar word or a synonym may be used in the passage rather than this exact same word as is in the question itself. That is done on purpose again to make sure that you are being eagle-eyed in looking at the passage as you skim it. Similarly, juxtaposition, as we've covered in this video already, are there two statements next to each other that seem linked, but you can't prove, based on the information here, that they actually specifically are? For some as well, it may seem like the answer is can't tell, just because the same wording is not on par in the question as in the passage, but sometimes you need to make a value judgment based on the information you have, which means that you need to make a conclusion and decide that though the passage and the statement are worded differently, the meaning behind them is the same. And then numbers we covered as well when we were talking about keywords in the previous video. Numbers stand out, so they're really good as keywords when you're looking for those details for a specific question. They are helpful to stand out. However, sometimes they're used more than once, so you want to make sure that you're skimming the whole passage. Sometimes there are lots of numbers used in a passage because it's talking about populations, for example, or dates in history, and so you'll want to be mindful that you're looking at those carefully. You'll also want to be mindful that sometimes they make you do simple additional subtraction. For example, how many years are there between two events, or averages, for example, one of the things to keep in mind about averages in particular is that though usually an average of a group of numbers means that there are some smaller than that number and some bigger than that number and some maybe around that number, it is also in the realm of possibilities that to get to a certain average, all of the numbers in the set of information are exactly the same, and that yields the same average. So you do want to be very, very mindful of those tricky kinds of questions. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here in the true, false, can't tell question sets. So here there is a passage, and then we're going to go through 4, so a full question set of true, false, can't tell questions based on the same passage. So it looks exactly like what you will be doing when you are doing your answer. So similarly, I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do as you go. So first we're going to look at the question itself. Armstrong and Aldrin spent less than 3 hours on the surface of the moon. So we know that we're going to be looking for less than 3 hours on the surface of the moon, and these 2 people. Okay. If you know a lot about the moon landings, remember to check your knowledge at the door, because we're using just what we've got. So we're going to skim this passage, and we're going to be looking as we skim for information about the time they actually spent on the moon. It seems in the first paragraph that we're looking at the event itself. We're not seeing about timings so much, but in this second paragraph, I can see that it says Armstrong and Aldrin spent just over 2 hours outside the lunar module collecting samples and conducting experiments. So that suggests that this will be moving towards true, because just over 2 hours is less than 3 hours. Let's keep looking though, although the emission marked. Okay, so this is talking more about the significance of the Apollo mission and the later missions themselves. So this looks like the only piece of information about the hours and the time spent, and we know that it was less than 3 hours because that was the only time that they spent on the moon itself. So that answer is true. Let's take a look at another question and see if we can do this. Same exact practice, but with a different question. Question 2, the Apollo 11 mission was the most famous and successful lunar mission. Okay, so we know that in the beginning and the end they were talking about the event, and then the effect of the event and the consequences in the third paragraph. So let's make sure we skim. We're looking for this idea of it being famous and successful as a lunar mission. Okay. Immediately in the first sentence, we see the word that it successfully landed, but most successful we haven't seen yet. So that might be a distractor, it might be a key word. We're seeing this, the mission achieved President Kennedy's challenge to land a man on the moon. Okay. And then we're looking at this third paragraph. Although, and again, that although seems to suggest that maybe, even though it was a major triumph, okay, it says it wasn't the final one. 5 more crewed Apollo missions to reach the lunar surface, brought back new insights, and that the geopolitical significance was celebrated, but there's no way of knowing really. Well, there's no proof that it absolutely was the most famous mission, so we know it's not true. And we also don't know it's false, right? because we do know that it was a major triumph, new insights, celebrated, successful, but we don't know that it's the most successful, so we can't say it's false either, which gives us only the option of C, can't tell, for this question. Okay. Let's take a look at another based on the same passage. Buzz Aldrin was the pilot of the craft that stayed in lunar orbit. Okay, so I'm going to be looking for Buzz Aldrin, pilot, and stayed in lunar orbit. And again, any information we know about the moon landing left at the door, only here. I'm seeing in this first paragraph, Buzz Aldrin as the lunar module pilot. Okay, that seems like he would be the pilot, but let's double check the rest of it. Michael Collins orbiting above in the command module. Okay, so again, this is getting slightly more complex in that Buzz Aldrin was the pilot, but we don't know if he was the one who stayed in the lunar orbit. Based on the other information we looked at for the first question, it says Aldrin spent just over 2 hours outside the lunar module collecting samples, and that indeed it was Collins that remained in the lunar orbit, maintaining communications and performing observations. So though in the first paragraph it says that he was the pilot, it was actually Collins who remained in orbit and stayed in the craft, doing the communications and observations there. And we cannot see any more information about the piloting of the Apollo 11 mission in that final paragraph. Let's take a look at our options here. It seems like it's definitely not true, but also it's not that we can't tell, because we know that it was indeed not Aldrin who stayed in the lunar orbit, but that it was Collins. And realize that if we had just read that first paragraph, Buzz Aldrin as the lunar module pilot, and thought we have 28.6 seconds to get through this question, let's go, true, let's move, we would have got this answer wrong. We would have chosen true, and if we had double checked with that second key phrase of lunar orbit, if we hadn't checked on that, we would have been guided to the wrong answer. We would have been guided to true, whereas now, thank goodness, we looked at that second keyword because we found that it was actually guiding us towards Collins as the pilot who stayed in lunar orbit, and thus gives us our correct answer of false. And final question in this question set. The collection of moon rocks was the reason for the Apollo 11 mission. Collection of moon rocks. I've definitely seen the word collection. Let's keep an eye out for rocks as well to see how we can find about this information. Let's also decide to keep reason on board with us as one of the keywords we're skimming for, to ensure that we've covered this, because we don't know if these moon rocks were the mission or just something that happened. So immediately in the first paragraphs, I'm looking at this mission achieved President Kennedy's challenge to land upon the moon and return safely before the decade ended. That seems like a pretty clear main goal, but we don't know if that is the only goal, or if we have any contradicting information in the next two paragraphs. So let's take a look at this. Now, it does say that Armstrong and Aldrin were collecting samples and conducting experiments, and we know that they were maintaining communications and performing observations. So it does seem like there was a science-based information here that they're looking for as part of the mission for the trip. We know that it was a triumph in the space race. So if they achieved what they needed to do, that would be considered a triumph. Let's keep going. Scientific analyses of the rocks brought back. Now, because we are also talking in this paragraph About the other Apollo missions happening now, we don't know if the samples collected here are moon rocks or something else. We also don't know if these rocks here were collected on one of these later crewed missions or on the first one. We know that we received new insight into the moon's composition and that the significance of the geopolitical mission was also celebrated, but we can't say for sure that the rocks were the full reason for the Apollo 11 mission. So we can't say it's true. We also can't say it's false because we don't really know what the main goal was. It seems like President Kennedy's goal was to land a man on the moon. We don't know about the astronauts' main goal for this mission, or why they wanted to go to the moon in the first place. So we also can't say that it's false because we know that they did spend time collecting samples. Here we have to choose can't tell because we can't say definitively yes or no collecting moon rocks was the reason for the Apollo 11 mission. Some tips and tricks to guide you for more support. Practice timed sessions and sections of the verbal reasoning part of the exam because time is your biggest opponent in this section. 22 minutes will go by very quickly. You want to read the statements before reading the passage. This will help you find key words and they will stand out to you more easily because you'll be knowing what you're looking for as you skim the passage. Make educated guesses through the process of elimination. There is no negative marking in the verbal reasoning section. So if you are unsure, give it your best guess because there is a likelihood you will gain points, but if you don't answer it at all, there is no likelihood that you can gain points from that question. You also increase your probability of getting the correct answer if you eliminate at least one of the options because you know it's not correct. And with that, focusing on the wrong answers, what do you know is not right, is always helpful as well. Answer every question as I said, and then use the flag and review flagged question features to your advantage to avoid losing valuable time on tricky questions and reviewing questions you know are right. So there is an option at the bottom of your page on the UCAT where you can flag a certain question to come back to, and then you can move on to the next question. Ideally, you would mark that question with an answer and then flag it to come back so that if you run out of time, you still have an answer there. Then you have an option to review all your flagged questions all at once. So rather than clicking through all 44 questions in order to review the ones you don't know, that guides you only to the flagged questions so that you can only go back to the questions you know you need a little bit more time on. Also, you want to use the time gained by the true, false, can't tell questions for extra time on the free text questions because there is less reading that you have to do for those true, false, can't tell questions because you always have the same answers. You just have to work out the veracity of the statement, whereas in the free text questions you have to read the question or the incomplete statement as well as 4 answer choices and work out the correct answer from there. So you may need a little bit more time there, so make sure you use your time wisely. That is it for this video. There will be 3 more videos reviewing the kinds of questions that appear in the free text question sets of the verbal reasoning exam. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.